Now that we've got a custom map class put together, we're going to start thinking about adding in some methods to it to add a marker to the screen. Remember, the entire original goal of this application was to take the randomly generated user and company and add them as markers. So we're going to start to focus on adding those markers. Before we write any code, I just have one quick aside here. We're going to first write out a bad implementation for adding markers onto the map. So we're going to write out bad code first. Once we write out the bad code, we'll then discuss why it is bad, and we'll start to refactor it into a much better approach by using interfaces. So I want you to see the bad code because I think that the kind of bad style that we're going to look at is something that you might decide to do on your own. I'm not saying that you write bad code, I just want to help you understand what might be a bad approach and a way to improve it. As we go through this, I'm going to be very clear in telling you where the bad code is and how we're going to fix it, so you will know what is bad and what is good. Anyways, let's get to it. So I'm going to flip on over to my code editor once more. I'm inside of my custom map file right here. So I want to add one or two methods to this class to add in a marker. I think that maybe a good way to do this, hint, this is not a good way, this is where the bad code starts, would be to add in two separate methods. Maybe one method will take in a user as an argument and add a marker to the map. And then the other one can take in maybe a company as an argument and add a marker to the map. So I'm going to make one one method in here called add user marker, and a second one called add company marker. Now for both these methods, we're going to take in a user and a company. So we need to annotate those arguments on these methods. To annotate the argument as being an instance of a user and an instance of a company, we have to import those types into this file. So up at the top, I'm going to add in an import statement for user, from user, and company, from company, like so. Now, one thing that we've kind of been skirting and not really discussing in great detail is exactly what we get when we create a class. Remember, user and company, we created them as classes. In Typescript, classes kind of have like a dual nature. When we make a class, we can use it to create an instance of an object. But we can also use a class or a variable that refers to a class, which is what user and company are, to refer to that type as well. So user and company can be used to create an instance of a user or refer to the user type, one or the other. There are several other things in Typescript that kind of have this dual nature of simultaneously being a value and a type at the same time. And we're going to have a bigger discussion on this later on. I just want to mention this really quickly. So now back down in those two methods, we can say that add user marker is going to receive an argument called user, and it should be of the user type. Now I don't think we're going to return anything here, so I'll put on a return type of void. And then we'll do something similar for company as well. Okay, so once again, kind of just like a side tip here or side note, this approach right here, creating two separate methods to add the marker, this is essentially the bad code. So we would not generally want to do this, but we'll discuss why in just a little bit. So now inside of add user marker, we can start to think about how we can add a marker on the screen. Once again, I want to walk through the type definition file for Google Maps and try to understand how to add a marker by just looking at the type definition file. Again, you can go look at Stack Overflow to figure out how to do this stuff, but I just want you to get in the habit of trying to look at a type definition file to understand how to work with the library. So to pull up the type definition file for Google Maps, I can go back up to like google.maps.map right here and do a command click on map, like so. And that will pull up the Google Maps type definition file. Then in here, I'm going to do a search for marker. And I'm going to look for a class called marker under the section called overlays. So this class right here is how we create a marker and show it on the screen. We're going to create an instance of a marker. So we need to figure out how to create a marker properly and pass it some configuration options that it's going to get a marker to display in the correct position. So to figure out how to do that, we can take a look at the constructor function. So here's the constructor. It tells us that whenever we create an instance of a marker, we can optionally pass in some options. And that options object should conform to the marker options interface. So in other words, when we create a marker, we can customize it by passing in an object that has the properties specified by this interface right here. So I'm going to command click again on interface marker options. And this is going to tell us the possible options we can pass into the marker. You'll notice that these options are once again nicely commented, so we can scroll through and read all the different ways that we can somehow customize this marker. There are two properties in particular that we're going to take a look at. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit, and I'm going to find one option called Map right here. When we create a marker, we can pass in that options object, and it can have a map property that will be a reference to the map that we want to show the marker on. So in a normal Google Maps application, or I should say like on any web page, you can potentially have multiple different maps. So like, maybe 5 maps tiled about the screen or something like that. If we create a marker, we have to specify which map we want to add the marker to. So the idea here is when we create the marker, we're going to pass in an options object that has a map property, and that map property is going to refer to the map that we want to add the marker to. That's it. Now the other option that we're going to take a look at is a couple more properties down right here. So the other property we care about is the position property, and this is going to specify where the marker shows up on the map itself. And you'll notice we can either pass in an instance of latitude longitude class or a latitude longitude literal, which is just a plain object that has a latitude that is a number and a longitude that is a number. So once again, we've now taken a look at a type definition file and kind of figured out how to create a marker by just looking at this stuff without having to go and look at some complicated documentation or anything like that. So let's try to now create a marker using this information. Back inside of custom map, I'm going to find add user marker. So I'm going to create a new google.maps.marker. So that's going to be the instance of the marker. This is us calling constructor function right here. And so that's where we can optionally pass in some marker options object. So I'm going to pass in an object, and I'm going to give it that map property, which is going to refer to the map that we want to show this marker on. So the map we want to show this marker on is going to be the Google map that we created and assigned as a field to our custom map class. So map is going to be this dot Google map. And then remember, the second property we care about is the position property. So I want to specify the position for this marker as well. We can hover over position right here, and it will tell us that this property has to be either a latitude longitude instance or a latitude longitude literal. And remember that literal would be an object that has the lat and long properties. So this will be an object, and we're going to get the latitude from our user because that's where our location is coming from. So we can do user.location.lat. And then we'll also do our longitude, which will be user.location.lng. And that's pretty much it. All right, so let's save this. We don't have any implementation for add company marker just yet, but I just want to make sure that we can actually get a marker to display. So I'm going to save the file. I'm going to flip back over to index.ts. I'm going to uncomment the user import statement up here so we can create an instance of a user and then add it to our map. So I'll say const user is new user. I'll then make sure that I assign the custom map to a variable. So I'll say custom map is going to be that custom map we created. And then we can do custom map dot add user marker and pass in the user. All right, so let's save this. I'm going to flip back over to my browser, and I can see a marker displayed. Now remember, we are randomly generating the latitude and longitude for the user, so every time you refresh, you're going to see the marker in a different location. Sometimes the marker might not actually be visible and kind of like off the screen. That means that we just generated a latitude or longitude that is not like in the limits of typical Google Maps. That's probably not going to happen too often. I just want to mention that if you sometimes refresh and you don't see the marker, chances are everything is working correctly. We just have a bad latitude. All right, so that looks pretty good. So let's take a quick pause right here and start to implement our add company marker method in the next video.